Welcome to the Tea of Life podcast, where our mission is to transform every attitude of life by encouraging and equipping you to live the life you love and love the life you live. I am your host, Tiffany Thompson. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Tea of Life podcast. I am so excited that you have decided to join me today. Here at Tea of Life Podcast, we want you to do life better, your life better. And we want to give you the encouragement and tools that you need in order to achieve this. This week, I talk about a video that's being shared around Facebook about the effects of using cell phones. In this video, they call it digital dementia. And their purpose is to persuade you to stop using your cell phone so much. However, I call it informational bullying. Because although I do agree with lowering the use of our digital devices and possibly some of their reasoning, I don't agree with their fear-mongering technique. This video that I'm referring to starts out with slow, emotional piano music and a guy who looks like he's about to have a nervous breakdown. I'm sure you've seen it. He says he cannot even imagine what the rates of suicide, homicide, rates of depression, and accidental deaths due to overdose is going to look like in the future. He is blaming all of this on the use of cell phones. Sounds great and encouraging so far, huh? So after the scene is over, it automatically goes to another guy who introduces the digital dementia word that I mentioned earlier. He says that we rely on our smartphones so much that it is making us stupid. Now, I have watched other videos of people who talk about how they don't need to know certain things because Google can tell them anything that they need to know. So I do understand where these comments are coming from. This is also similar to a conversation that my husband and I have had together regarding the possible rise of dementia due to the lack of having to remember information. But this guy in the video is saying that we have lost the ability to memorize phone numbers, and he's referring to pretty much everyone in the statement. He equates this to having our arm in a sling for 6 months and the muscles atrophy because they are not being used. He implies that using our phones to keep our schedules and to-do lists is not using our brain muscles to remember things. He's automatically assuming that we aren't filling our brain with other information instead. When he implies that using our cell phone to keep our schedules and to-do lists is not using our brain muscles to remember things, he's not remembering, pun intended, that we have used lists for hundreds, probably thousands of years. My parents and grandparents used lists to help them remember things, and none of them ever suffered from memory loss. They used paper calendars to help them remember dates and appointments. Businesses and some households had these things called Rolodex. I'm sure you remember those, right? And they used these to remember phone numbers long before any digital device was readily available to us. So according to a little research that I did, I found out that paper calendars were actually first being used during the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. And they started using them in order to allow bosses and managers to keep a handle on their increasingly busy schedules. I personally believe that they were being used even earlier than that, because if you remember Moses and the 10 Commandments, you will remember that God inscribed the 10 Commandments on a tablet in order for people to remember them. In Exodus 31:18, it says that when the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the covenant law, the tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. Maybe this could be an actual account of the very first to-do list ever made. After this, the scene suddenly switches to another person on a stage speaking to an audience, still with the same sappy, emotional-driven music in the background. He asks if he can borrow someone's phone from the audience. He clearly came unprepared for his own presentation. So he takes the phone from the audience member and begins to talk with it in his hand. He's not looking at the phone or even showing the phone to the audience. He's just holding it in his hand. Then he asks the question, "Do you feel that you are the most important thing to me right now?" Then immediately, before giving anyone the chance to actually think about the question or answer, he answers his own question with, "No, you do not." So in this statement, he is telling the audience how they feel without actually giving them a moment to decide how they feel for themselves. So I'm sure just like you, this has happened to me. I've had conversations with other people who have held their phone in their hand without looking at it during our conversation. And to tell you the truth, it does not make me feel less important. I do not feel that they are telling me that the phone is more important than our current conversation. But because he answered the question before even giving the audience time to think about their own answer, they now, without question, more than likely, feel the way that he has told them to feel. So I'm guessing that in his eyes, holding the phone in his hand makes it more important than the person he's actually talking to. I'm wondering if this message would change if he was holding a pen, a piece of paper, a paper calendar, a set of keys, a flashlight, or a Coke, or even a McDonald's cheeseburger. By this measurement to what he's saying, we would still feel that we are not the most important thing in that moment just by him holding something in his hand. So when we go to dinner with other people, we have to hold the utensils in our hand in order to eat, and we hold the glass of water or whatever else we're drinking in our hand. So what's the difference? Seeing a phone or anything else in someone's hand does not make me feel less important to the person that I'm speaking to. So actually, he does say that if you don't have a pocket to put it in, find a shelf and walk over and put it on the shelf. So for me personally, I think that the person walking away from me would probably be what made me feel less important than if they were to immediately respond to me just by holding their phone in their hand. So another question that I have is, what about a book? If he's holding a book in his hand, would he put it down before having a conversation? What if the book were a Bible? Just saying. But we are told that books are good, right? So little side note here, speaking of books, I hear over and over again how we need to read more and make our children read more. And this is part of the argument of getting more away from our cell phones and back to actually reading. So some fairly argue that reading books and highlighting and taking notes in a digital device is not the same as an actual paper book. We argue that we need to stop staring at screens and get back to reading real, actual books. Just like in the video that sparked this talk today, we hear about the digital epidemic of children and some adults, how they're not able to socialize properly during their lack of interaction from staring at a screen all day long. We argue that they need to look at and get to know the world around them for a change. We might be able to say that we have a digital epidemic, but before you so quickly agree to this, I'd like to tell you about an epidemic that swept a country back in the 18th century. In the 1700s, there was actually an outrage at the number of people who could not put down their book. Yes, I said it, their book. And this was not a digital book, this was a paper book. It was so intense that others around them started to notice that there was an increase in anxiety from readers. There's that word anxiety. You remember that from when I opened the podcast. Okay, so it's been around for a while. It was actually considered a media panic. According to historytoday.com, a dangerous disease appeared to afflict the young, which some diagnosed as a reading addiction and others as reading rage, reading fever, reading mania, reading lust. How many of those words right there are we using today to describe the quote-unquote epidemic that we are witnessing today? The New York Times called it "when novels were bad for you," and their writer referred to novels as being equivalent to today's scrolling through Twitter. I mean, really, is it truly any different? I mean, I guess it is, maybe a little, but we can get lost in a good fantasy novel, wishing our life was the same as or even hating the character in the book, just the same as we can get lost scrolling through Facebook, feeling the same exact way about the people that we see there. Whether we practice it or not, we are more in control of what we do and don't see, or what we do and don't read on social media than we are by reading fiction in a book. But, of course, there is the whole attention span problem that we could talk about, but I'm not going to address that in this episode. The thing that is going to stress out and overwhelm us the most is listening to people who keep telling us what we should and should not do. We are continuing to listen to others tell us what is right and what is wrong for our own selves and our family, when we should be listening to God speak to us through the Holy Spirit. We need to figure out if the Holy Spirit is convicting us or if man is condemning us. And if you don't consider yourself a Jesus follower, you still have this little gut-prompting feeling in the pit of your stomach when you know something is right or wrong. Listen to it. To me, it seems that people in this video are just telling us what we are doing wrong and the effects of these wrong things, but they're not providing a solution to the problem. They are quick to judge and not so quick to give answers. You should not allow me or anyone else besides God tell you what is right or wrong for you and your family. Listen to the information that is given to you, then ask God what you need to do with this information. There will be times when you may need to take action, and there will be times when you need to throw it out and run in the opposite direction. There are also so many people around us telling us what we should and shouldn't do. Stop using your cell phones. Eat only organic. Get rid of everything and live a minimalist lifestyle. Discipline your kids. Heck, don't discipline your kids. Take out a loan. Get out of debt. Yeah, I know that some of these are good and maybe some not so good, but if these things are not something that you are being convicted of instead of being condemned of by others, then they are not really good after all. No matter how good, or in this case, how bad the world tells us something is, we really need to follow the prompting of the Holy Spirit. Whenever we allow others to be our only voice, they become our only God. When I was finding my way as a homeschooling mom, I naturally surrounded myself with other homeschooling moms. This is what we do when we want to learn more and gain support about something that we desire to do or have suddenly become passionate about. We surround ourselves with other people who also want to do or are already doing what we're doing. This helps us learn and gives us the motivation that we need when our passions get tough. However, there did become a time when I ended up needing to take a break from hanging out with other homeschooling moms. I decided that I just couldn't do it anymore. Now, I do want to say that not all homeschooling moms can be tyrants. I have since found some really great friends who are homeschooling moms and things are great, but at that particular time, I had to walk away. Those other moms were very adamant that their way was the absolute right and best way, and that was it. I tried very hard to keep up and measure up to their standards, and it was almost detrimental. It was the moment that I went to the grocery store and had to leave my cart full of groceries due to a sobbing breakdown in the middle of the produce aisle that I knew that I needed to surround myself with different people. I just could not measure up to the condemnation of only buying non-organic grapes and strawberries for my family, therefore leading me into a frenzy in the middle of Publix. I was allowing others around me to dictate what was right and wrong for my family. I was not listening to the voice of God. People around you can act like they're the voice of God, and they can say some really compelling things while slow, emotional music plays in the background to make you believe it as well. It can really be confusing at times, but distinguishing the difference can be really tough, and it takes practice. My biggest desire for you is to live a meaningful life, for you to love the life you're living. And that can't happen if we're constantly bombarded with all the informational bullying constantly coming at us at all times. This kind of information probably causes more stress for moms and families than any cell phone could ever render. The most ironic and funny thing to me about this video that sparked this whole conversation in the first place was this. At the very end, there were these words: if you struggle and have a hard time, consider taking an online therapy session. An online therapy session. Really? They didn't recommend a face-to-face therapy session, leave your cell phone at the door kind of thing. They recommended an online therapy session for your digital addiction. All right, I love you guys, and I want the best life for you. I want you to live the best life possible. You only get one. Make it the absolute best it can be. Do what you know is right for your family, and stop listening to all the crazy information that you're being bombarded with. Filter through it, figure out what you need to do and what you need to throw away. So if you found this episode helpful or in any way freeing, please let me know. If you didn't like what I said, feel free to let me know that too. Either way, I would love to hear from you. Leave me a comment on Facebook or on this episode on my website at toflifepodcast.com. Have a great week, and I will see you next Monday. If you like Tea of Life podcast and you've got two friends who want to create the life that they love to live, tell them about us. Find us on your favorite social media platform like Facebook or Instagram. Also, right now before you forget, go to Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts and search for Tea of Life podcast. Hit the subscribe button and never miss an episode. Thank you for listening to Tea of Life podcast. We'll see you next Monday.